Welcome everyone to Is Astrology Gender Biased? A panel discussion on gender, identity and sexual orientation in the horoscope with Erin Sullivan and friends, Alex Trenoweth, Moshe Wolfe, Boaz Filer, Sarah DeHaven and Tom Jacobs. We will begin with a lecture by Erin Sullivan, followed by 15-minute segments with each speaker. Welcome, Erin. Let's begin.
Welcome, everyone. I'm honored to be in your company. I think it's wonderful. And I want to say that we've definitely chosen an interesting topic, and we did it by absolute just planning on calendars. But I want to say happy Valentine's Day, everybody. So you should all be wearing red and hearts and doing what you do. But, you know, I love the title. We came up with it together, Is Astrology Gender Biased? And I wasn't really sure what I was talking about at first. I mean, I had some ideas, but it's developed, and I've written things. So I'm going to occasionally look up, but I want to read this essay that I wrote on the role of gender and identity. And the role of gender and identity and fixation on who one is by a male-female's boundary in the horoscope, for example, could ignore a deep and meaningful connection between the astrologer and the client. And people have problems, not all of which are gender-based, but if we look deeply, we will find a unique combination in gender in all of us, because we make up, in the Jungian sense, the anima and the animus, although he also was gender biased, but then that was then, and this is now. And I was just thinking about my Latin professor, Peter Smith, who was a complete riot. They have a very good sense of humor, the Brits. And he said that the wonderful thing about Latin was that you could actually have gender without sex. And I thought, whoa, so it was a riot in the classroom. He was like, so funny in that British way, where, by the way, Oscar Wilde basically lost his life for 50 years of being a queen. So, there's a lot of history that goes on. My hair just stood on end. Have you thought about this psychologically? I'm sure you have. And how one's feelings and images of self, and self, uppercase and lowercase, self being the psychic imperative, arise with the client when you're in session. It may not have come up in the notes that you ask for ahead of the session, but it will come out, because that's what happens, is it comes out. And how the client's sexuality is normal to them, but still in most worlds outside of Europe, say in North America, there's no room for binary, homosexual, gay, bi, whatever the client's gender is. But we're much less biased now than ever before, as a contemporary modern culture, that is. However, the underlying issues still provoke questions for both client and astrologer, because, we might think it's all okay, but who knows? We don't really know. We haven't had a poll taken yet. So sex and gender have now begun to open our doors to the psyche, in which some contents never before discussed in our field are present, which is why this is such a phenomenal gathering of us. And a lot of, our so-called culture began in 5th century Athens with Socrates and Plato and so on. And in astrology, it goes way back to the Mesopotamians. And in astrology, as we practice it now, there's only 2 feminine planets, the moon and Venus. However, I think that Pluto actually falls into the sort of gender bend arena because of his intimate seasonal relationship with Persephone, who, abducted by Hades into his underworld domain, because he didn't have a wife and he didn't need one, and it was the only way anybody was going to get him. Nobody wants to go to the underworld, so she got snatched. And then he ultimately, through her, becomes, I think, a dual gender. His complete absorption of Persephone's presence interjected into the psychic realm, in which case he then becomes essentially bi. So he became the queen and the consort, and thus in part feminine dominated. In Greek, so there's, Moon and Venus and Pluto is sort of a little questionable. In Greek literature, the symposium, which is literally means a drinking party, symposium, where Socrates and his mates would all lie about on couches drinking, and symposium literally means a drinking party. And Socrates introduced their topic, that being love. So they would drink and talk and chat, and everybody would have their piece. And it's really an interesting dialogue to read of Plato's, called the Symposium. In it discusses two types of love. Number one of which is higher consciousness, which is thus male dominated. Yeah? That is that Aphrodite Uranus, who inspired men to higher levels of thought, is the one who is the ruler of the intellectual aspect of man, because she was, after all, born out of her father's semen as it fell into the sea, being castrated by the four dominant women of the time, three. And the semen of the castration actually falls into the sea, out of which rose Aphrodite from the foam, which resulted in the famous Botticelli painting. So Venus on the half shell, which I think is kind of funny, but still on the half shell. So it's firmly masculine in her consciousness and power. She has arisen. She is her father's daughter. She is the daughter of Uranus. And she became Aphrodite Uranus, queen of both upper and lower realms. And then there's the second Venus, who is the wife and mother. And she's called Venus Pandemos, of the people in Greek. And she's not a goddess, but she's a bit of a mortal, and she draws men into her realm, supposedly to seduce the man into his lower nature, which is his sexuality. And otherwise, we don't know what he was doing with his sexuality, do we? Except we really do, because that time was when men were with men, and God knows for ages, eons back, literally, the astrological ages, men and women have been separated, and the men have spent half the time hunting, and there's the women at home sort of kind of storing the corn and the grain and so on. And so, one wonders, well, what did they do, while the genders were actually separated for social reasons, for important reasons, for survival. So there were the hunters and the gatherers. And I have to assume that the sexuality didn't cease upon the departure of the male from the conclave of the feminine and the masculine, but they came together, they bore children. Things were, considered normal at the time. But Socrates warns men definitely not to be seduced by the pandemic. In other words, the one who is the bearer of children, because it has to honor Anrania as the highest form of inspiration to philosophy, which means literally love of wisdom, philosophis. So it's the love of wisdom and the higher mind of thought, as opposed to the lower mind of sex and passion and being in the arms of women. And so it seems that men who were both were not really considered at all. Homosexuality means that sex, the nature of men, was not really the sex and nature of women, because homo is male, and so it's only among men that it would be considered possible. I find that rather difficult to actually believe, seeing as the women spent most of their time together and alone in very close, intimate situations where their sharing would have been very deep, as with the males, which of course is an entirely different kind of sexuality. I hope that's not at issue, because I know that the concept of the idea is at issue, but I don't think that the actual difference between male and female sex is at issue, because it is very, very different among men and among men and women. So how do we deal with that ourselves, excuse me, philosophically as in the symposium. And that's, in a sense, I think what we're doing today is a symposium, a singing together of the ideas. And in our astrology work, especially, is when we use that. We fall into a kind of, not trance, but certainly a very altered state in order to be able to interpret a horoscope and speak to the person and address the situation. So how do we deal with that philosophically, as in the symposium, in our astrology work? How do we discuss that? So I think it's time to begin seriously to take this into account as we move toward global awareness and shifts in openness and personal honesty, which really is what it's about, is honesty. The world is, and its nations, doesn't really, the globe itself doesn't acknowledge this aspect of the dual nature in humanity. As we know, men and women, period, separate. But the Western world is much more inclined now with the consciousness of the duality of the human condition. And we're all both masculine and feminine. We have to remember that Carl Jung came up with the concept of the anima and the animus, which are, again, Greek words, turn to Latin, anima being feminine, and animus, ending in us, being the masculine. And so Jung was aware of the mutual roles in each individual, and also that as an aspect of the psyche, and that even though he would maybe lean more towards the anima being in the woman's psyche and animus being in the man's psyche, I think he was aware of the duality of the situation and the fact that the anima and the animus reside in both male and female people's psyche. I mean, for example, it's only really in the Western world. I mean, remember Stonewall. I mean, everybody knows about Stonewall. That was a very important moment in time when my hair is on end, actually, when it became a revolution and that males wanted to come out. I mean, and women also wanted to come out, and they did. And they did in droves to the point of being, practically slaughtered in the attempt to, reunite the masculine and the feminine, to recognize that it's possible to be both at once in harmony. So I remember, to sort of close it on something I was thinking about after I was writing all this and working on it, I remembered back to a time when I was about 7 or 8. And I much preferred playing with the boys. They were way more fun than the girls. And so I loved playing with the boys next door and the brothers and their friends. And we would rush about in the woods because in those days, there was more room for woods than there were houses. And so we had woods across the street. So I'd run around and play with them and all along. One day I was out after horsing around with the guys. We were all out there, the boys. And we're very young, yeah? There's no sex and gender identification really at that point, but it begins around the ages of 7 or 8, the consciousness of the split between. But the thing that really, really crushed me was that one day my mom called me in to show me, I'd order a doll, because in those days you could order something that was on the back of a sort of cereal package, etc. And we would send away for these tricks and trims. So I sent away for this wonderful doll. And my mother yelled at me from the stepway up the house to the woods that my doll had arrived, my Raggedy Ann doll had arrived in the mail. And I was so excited because I was dying for her. So I went racing towards the house and ran back through the woods to show my friends the doll and share my excitement. Well, that did not go over at all. I, in fact, was tied to a tree and they ran away with my Raggedy Ann. So my mom went looking for me, found me. I was distraught, and the boys never then, after that time with the doll, they left it lying in the woods. My mom had to explain to me everything. So I knew, and then I was aware of gender. not before that. So I think really it's the job of the astrologer to allow this awareness to rise if it does, and to work with all of our typologies, planets, aspects, and houses, and more, give the astrologer the potential stunning insight into the human condition. And there is no gender quality in any of them. There are masculine and feminine signs. They're considered to be such. But that's about concept. That's not really about gender, is it? It's about the aspect of there being this harmonic balance between the male and the female. And so that what we're looking at really is the human condition and our individual experience of it. And I'm just so pleased that we're on this panel, and I'm looking so much forward to hearing my colleagues' ideas and what they've thought about, because I know in preparation a lot of work has gone into doing this. So welcome, and I'm honored to be in your company. Thank you. So let's go hear what people have to say. Next.
It's me next, and thank you very much, Erin, for that. I just thought I'd like to share, because we're being very personal, I think, with the idea of gender identification. And I just want to say, when I kind of realized that I was going to be always a girl and never a boy, because I always wanted to be a boy. And the reason why was because I'm the eldest child, but my brother was always the heir. And he was the heir of what? He was the heir. He was going to be the family heir of whatever it was that our poor family had to give to him. And but I really kidded myself for a very long time that I could somehow pretend that I had a chance at being the heir of something. And when I was about 12 years old, my mom was watching a TV show, and they were talking about women who could choose the gender of their children, and if women had the power to choose the gender of the children. Now we know this is possible, but back then it wasn't possible. And my mom said to her friend, well, everybody would want to have a boy first. And I was absolutely devastated by this statement, because I thought, what is wrong with me? You know, why don't you want me to be first? You know, I am your first. And I find that extremely hard to deal with. So my job is not only as an astrologer, but I'm a teacher of adolescents. I teach a variety of different subjects, and I teach in different kinds of schools. And so I get to see how gender identity becomes an issue. And I had a 9-year-old boy. They were doing a play at school, and he was wearing lipstick. And he asked, can I wear my lipstick all day long? And we thought, I thought it was great. I thought it was the best idea ever. He can wear his lipstick all day long, wear his dress all day long. And he was actually told, well, yeah, you can wear it, but, you know, eventually going to take it off again. But I could see his face drop. Well, I got to take this off. I got to go back to being me. And I thought that was rather, I could feel the disappointment that he had to go back to being his self. The other thing I want to say is that I have a very masculine name. My name is Alex. If you don't know me by looking at me, if you just see my name in the email or whatever, you wouldn't know if I was a boy or a girl. And I've done this deliberately. I chose a name that, you know, is pretty much, you're not going to know. And I've received emails from people from around the world, really, who have thought I was a boy. And the way they have spoken to me has really upset me. I mean, there's no manners. There's no sort of gentleness that I would expect from my female friends. There is this really hardcore sort of speaking to me. And that has taught me a great lesson as well. And I just think that, you know, when we talk about gender in astrology, I think we have to be very careful when we are at the stage now where we have to address, how do you wish to be referred to? What are your pronouns that you rather be known as? I mean, personally, with Mamuna Leo, I'm happy with Your Majesty, you know? just call me Your Majesty. I don't, she, he, it, I just, you know, your graciousness, you know, that's all you need to do. But I don't mean to be, you know, to push it aside. I just want to say, you know, I have a different way of looking at things. But yet, even though I have a masculine name, and even though I have wished in my life that I could be a boy and to have the opportunities that boys have had, I am unmistakably a girl. I cannot dress as a boy. There's nothing I can do to disguise my femaleness, that I am who I am. And to be another gender, I would have to make some serious decisions about my appearance and other things that I'm not so willing to take. So now I want to just talk about my PowerPoint about a very difficult subject. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully it's all going to work. Now, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, so that means I need to go here and I need to share my screen.
I don't see it either.
Here we come.
Thank you. Well done.
Okay, so this is a very, very sad story. So just kind of brace yourselves a little bit. This is about a young man. His name is, David Reamer. Now, he was a twin. He had a male twin, and they had to be circumcised. Both boys had to be circumcised because what had happened was when they urinated, the gland was swollen and it was causing a lot of problems. So at the age of 22 months, they had to be circumcised. David had to go first, and they went through a very unusual procedure that involved cauterization, the burning. And David's penis was pretty much severed and rendered useless. So what they told the parents was, who were very religious people, we think the best thing to do would be to bring your boy up as a girl. And we would like you to just pretend that your son is actually a girl, and for now on, because he doesn't have the outward evidence, he is a girl. So they brought him up as a girl. So here he is at a very young stage as a girl, kind of long curly hair, and they had to reconcile with their decision. And so they brought the brother in for counseling sessions. And this is all a very new thing. This has never happened before in a clinical situation. And they wanted to counsel both the boys to become, for David to accept that he was a girl. He was called Brenda, and for the other brother to accept that his brother was actually a sister. And David, the subject here, was so traumatized by this that at the age of 14, he threatened to commit suicide. Both boys came to a terrible end. The brother ended up committing suicide, and David did as well. And what I just want to say about this was that even though David was put in a situation where he was consciously unaware of being he was a girl according to his parents, but he was a boy inside, and he could not quite reconcile this. So I think that, you know, when we talk about gender and we talk about trying to reassign things and we try to reassign people's feelings, that we're on very difficult grounds. but I also want to say, as a secondary school teacher, in a modern sense, that children are experimenting and they're trying to find their own identity, and this experiment, because that's what it was with David Reimer, was a disaster. And from everybody's point of view, from the doctor's point of view, who are embarrassed that their experiment was a failure, to the children who were involved, who ended up committing suicide, to the parents who allowed this to happen and had to deal with all that kind of guilt. This was a terrible, terrible case study of gender reassignment that just didn't work. I think you can't force someone to identify as a gender if they don't want to accept that as a gender. So let me bring that back to me. And sorry, Boaz, did you want to say something? I just want to say that we have to realize that maybe things aren't so black and white as we think they are. Maybe, at certain times of our life, we more identify with the feminine, maybe more times we identify with the masculine. And I just want to say how happy I am to be in a world where, I'm not going to be judged badly on the choices I make as an individual for what I do in my private life. And we had a very big case here in England, a very kind of well-known TV presenter called Philip Schofield came out as being homosexual. Now, he, as far as I knew he was in a happy marriage, had children and stuff like that, and suddenly he came out as being homosexual. And although I understand that, I sympathize with the wife who has had to deal with this all silently all this time. I'm also very happy for him to be able to finally express what he really feels, and that he's in a world that, unlike Oscar Wilde or unlike Alan Turing or others, he could be in a world where he can express his sexuality and not be judged for it. So I think we are in a very interesting time as astrologers, where we can make a lot of room and a lot of allowances for our clients to explore their sexuality and to feel acceptance. We have a long way to go, but I'm really glad that we don't live in the 1950s anymore or the 1300s anymore, that we seem to be moving forward on this. And so I'll park that. Oh, I got his chart. It's a noon chart. So you can't use the angles and you can't use the moon, but I don't think you can find homosexuality in a chart. I don't think it's there. I think love, and how great it is that we're doing this webinar the day before Valentine's Day. God tells us to love people. He doesn't say love people. If you're a man, you gotta love a woman. He doesn't say, he doesn't put boundaries on love. He says love is everywhere, and love is all around us, as the Trogs once said. And just on the eve of Valentine's Day, I just want to say, love the people you're with, and don't worry so much about being judged. And if people are judging you, well, what are you going to do? Just love the people that are going to accept you and support you, and happy Valentine's Day, right? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That was fabulous. I'm so excited about what you had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin.
You're very welcome.
You always look so wonderful too. So glamorous, whatever you do.
There you go. I mean, I try. Let's put it that way.
I look pretty.
72 and counting. Yes, right. That's a great, that chart you showed was perfect because it had the Saturn Uranus opposite Pluto.
Okay, yeah.
That was the revolution. And that was the revolutionary chart. 1966 was the time when everyone started coming out, you know, for not just out as personally in some way gender orientated, but collectively for freedom. So really, it isn't about sex and gender, is it? It's about freedom of both.
Just loving. Maybe love the one you're with.
Well, right. I think it's absolutely necessary to take all that into account. And I mean, during your talk, I made notes, and I just really had to, because I thought, you know, your own personal story, you know, and like mine, you know, being, when the boys found out that I was a real girl and liked dolls, I was tied to the tree, you know, and they all ran away and they wouldn't play with me anymore, which was really rather sad, because I mean, I loved that kind of play. I was an athlete, you know, I threw shot for, you know, as part of the things that I could do besides a 100-yard dash and do well. So, I mean, that was considered to be very masculine, yeah, to be able to do that, especially the shot put. I mean, that this was not the girl's job, you know. I mean, men have big muscles and thick thighs and short and so on.
Oh, well, I'm a weightlifter, you know.
Well, there you go.
I've always been a power lifter, yeah.
Well, I think this is a very important factor in our psyche, is to be able to exercise ourselves physically and mentally by lifting weights or throwing the shot. I mean, I think we have to do some weightlifting when it comes to, you know.
You know what, Erin? Just something just occurred to me. You know, I can lift weights like the boys, but I can also breastfeed.
There you go.
Just let me say that.
Well, that's interesting, because I did the same thing, only twice. You know, with two girls. And I wanted to mention one thing that's really amusing is that these days, everything is different, at least within some schools. And my granddaughters, who are now in their 19 and 20, and I have a grandson who's 24. Actually, he's 26, my goodness. But the thing is that they went to a special school, not a special school, but it was special, and it was like an art school. And so the kids were much more open about everything. In fact, one boy showed up in a ball gown one day, you know, nothing said.
Fantastic, yeah.
It's fantastic, because, you know, everyone was gender bending in their adolescence. No one was going to take on the role of any particular type of gender identity. And yet they were not doing that on a daily basis, but it was obvious. And there was never any real discussion about it. And when I even asked my kids, well, what did they say when you showed them the ball gown? Nobody even batted an eye. It wasn't a problem. Yeah, so
it's like that in my school now. I think you know, back when I was a kid, I graduated from from high school in 1984. I hate to admit it, but 1984. I mean, my best friend was
so young.
Is homosexual, right? And I you know, even back then it was kind of a taboo. But now my daughter's she's in her 20s, in her early 20s, but you know, it's not a big thing. Boys and girls, they date together, and nobody cares. Nobody's really upset about it anymore as much as it was. And I think, you know, things like, I see boys in my school wearing nail varnish or whatever, or saying, I want to wear a skirt, and no one, it might be a little bit unusual, like my friend Billy wearing the lipstick. You know, everyone's like, okay, well, you can explore it. It's fine. It's great. And no one, they might experience prejudice at some point in their life, but they're going to get a lot of support now too, I think.
There is a lot.
And it's going to be a lot of a rough road still, I think, but it's different than it was 30 years ago when I was a kid.
It's very much different.
Sorry, 40 years ago, 50 years ago when I was a kid.
I know. Don't even ask me, okay, to try and go back that far. I was so young when I was 50. It was great. Anyway. But I mean, this business of I mean, nobody questioned anything in the school that I'm talking about with these young kids. It was a good example because it was almost like a, like a generative school that opened the doors for the allowance of freedom. And it was never even mentioned or thought about. I mean, nobody ever talked about it. But I mean, of course it was, remarked upon about the ball gown, because that's a really unusual thing to show up in school wearing. But, I just think that what you're having to say here is so important. I mean, with your own heritage and mine as well. I mean, I found it an insult, if you will, to have been treated. In fact, when I first did my first astrological reading in 1971, where I got some money paid for my work, the man said, "You think like a man." And I went, "Oh my God." I mean, it just stunned me. He said, "You think like a man?" And I said, "No, I think like a woman." I mean, I am a woman who thinks like a man. Is that what you mean? And I mean, it finally ended in rapport, but it was a very odd moment in time to be told I felt like a man.
I think the more important thing to get out of that is it a compliment? Is it a compliment to think like a man? Or is it a compliment to think like a woman?
This is exactly what I thought at the time.
Because if someone told me I thought like a woman, I'd be pissed off, right? I'm like, why are you telling me?
Think of yourself as, cooking in the kitchen and doing the bidding of the man.
Yeah. But now, a little bit, I'm kind of coming around to the idea that, as a single woman raising children and doing a job and doing other things, now I'm thinking, well, it's not such a bad thing to be thinking like a woman.
Not a bit.
But it took me a while to get to that. This is only a recent thought that I'm thinking, wow, I'm glad I'm thinking like a woman. Thank God I'm thinking like a woman, not like a man.
It's very interesting for people like us because we're intellectuals. We're not genders. I mean, we think for a living, if you will. And we have to come up with ideas. And of course, ideas have to be, clean. I mean, the whole idea of an idea is it has no gender attachment to it at all. Ideas are just the way they are. And so I think, just being able to think with freedom of thought is also amazing. I mean, really amazing, because I grew up in the 50s. My mother and I did have matching dresses, and she would get up in the morning, she had a house dress, which she would wear, and she wore her high heels to do her house cleaning. It was astounding. I mean, it was so traditional. It was absolutely astounding. And so I grew up with that, with movie star looking parents. I mean, and they really were, because there was a street shot of them. And I thought, whoa, this is one daunting pair of people. And my father was a real man. He was like a he-man doctor, lifesaver, just really very much, and had a hard time coming to terms with his second family, where he had two daughters, one of whom came out, and she was at Cornell University doing a PhD in genetics.
And of course, Erin, you are just the ultimate sort of beauty queen, aren't you?
I was actually a beauty queen, and
you can totally see it.
I was.
And you had to deal with those prejudices too.
Yeah, I became Miss Prince George. I was, the beauty queen, and I was meant to run for Miss British Columbia, and I was so offended by the whole thing that I quit. And that was in the newspaper. Erin Hutchison quits.
Linda's telling us we gotta be quiet now, basically, and sort of sum up. But I just want to say that I think things are different. It's good that they. I don't see you as being too much older than me, but I think things have changed down the generations. That, you know, your experience is different to mine. Mine is that, you know, we are now embracing different kinds of genders, whereas I think in your generation maybe things are a lot more black or white or defined. And you know, and I'm looking forward to hearing what other people have to say about that.
Thank you, Alex, for your talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I need to get a drink of water, guys. I'm just going to disappear for a little bit. Just excuse me, because I'm starting to cough. Okay, just mute my microphone. I'm going to mute it if I can.
Okay, so we have, who do we have? Oh,
Erin, Ari is on his way. He should be just another minute or two. At this stage, do we have any comments from our other speakers or anyone in the audience?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Damon.
Recently, this last year, great talk, by the way, both of you. This last year, I've been addressing the topic of agency and having your own personal agency to choose. And it seems, and I've discovered a great deal in the last year as well about gender, the philosophy behind gender. And it was, in my early thinking about this, it was related to identity for me. What do people root their identity in? And some really need to feel, I've especially noticed that in men, we're really insecure. And I've found a lot of strong women, and when in my life, and when addressed so that you listen, you're really listening, I don't consider it masculine. I consider it freedom. I consider when they speak to me, whether they're whatever their identity is or anything like that, it's just wanting to have that freedom. And I've been seeing that men have a lot of freedom in ways. I'm hearing a lot about that men have a lot of freedom to express themselves the way they want. And so these are all thoughts I'm thinking about, and I'm wondering if they interest you at all to speak about.
Damon, thank you very much for those comments and questions, and hopefully they'll be answered throughout the panel. But we really must now move to our next speaker, Boaz Filer, and Ari will be coming on later. So Boaz, please go ahead.
So, good morning, good evening, everyone, from wherever you are around the world. I'm joining you. It's 1:45 where I am, Jerusalem time, and Georgia's on my lap. And I'll be trying to present today something that would be both intriguing and would incite you to go on and continue to research the subject, which I find fascinating and very personal in my journey, in my life. And as both of you, dear ladies, were very personal, I'll be continuing along these lines. But before I do, let me share this slides that I have, and it's from a talk that I'm giving now about gender. It's called The New Gender Paradigm for Astrologers, and I'm going to be presenting it in April as well in the southwest part of the United States, if you're up there. So can you see my screen, everyone? Good.
Yes.
So we gathered tonight or today here to think about, is astrology gender biased? And I think the question is, are we? And as a brilliant astrologer said once, that was then and this is now. And I think we all understand that the world has changed, that we developed, that our consciousness shifted. So before we even go on, what does Wikipedia say gender is? Because what is this thing that everybody's talking about? It's a range of characteristics, right? Differentiating between masculinity and femininity. And we're not talking about sex. We're not talking about the biological characteristics. We're talking about hearts, not parts. And I'm going to say it a lot through this presentation that I'm going to fly by, because usually it's a lot longer. There's a lot of charts, but we're not going to be examining them. I'm just going to give you the info. So here's a new paradigm I'm presenting. So let's say we all learned as astrologers that the signs are either male or female. They alternate, and that was very apt to our consciousness at the age of Pisces, when there was the duality. And union was something sacred, not of this world, not of time and space, but as Socrates used to say, of the world of ideals. But we're not there anymore, are we? We're in a multicolor universe in the 21st century, where people identify themselves as all sorts of things. It just keeps getting wider and wider and wider. And it's a whole gender blender generation that is coming up with, that doesn't understand what the fuss was all about, as Alex was sharing before. And I was a teacher as well, so I know firsthand what she was talking about. And children today understand that we are on a continuum, and that none of us are binary. And indeed, let the first one of us that hasn't felt through their life that they're either too masculine or too feminine in a part of their life, get out of this meeting right now. And none of you would, because we all felt it. We all have this mix within us, and we move upon it. I might be more masculine in one part of my life today, but much more feminine in 10 years. So in this age of Aquarius, we speak of a continuum, and a continuum that is fluid within us. And we need to see and perceive the elements, I would suggest, more deeply. And in order to do that, I want to say that fire, being the initial element, the spark, is the only truly male element. Water is the only truly feminine element. Earth and air are byproducts of fire and water. Indeed, look at how the history of this planet has been shaped, and you would understand what I talk about. The only way that Earth has ever been created is when fire was being cooled by water, when the male element was being chilled by the feminine. And indeed, in Hawaii or places where there are active volcanoes, to this day, we see what happens when lava hits the water and new ground forms. And it's the lushest of and most fertile of grounds after a few years. So the only way that Earth is ever created, that ash is ever created, is by cooling down the male essence with femininity. So I would like to suggest that in this Technicolor, sorry, Georgia, in this Technicolor, she's getting jealous that I'm putting too much attention in you guys. In this Technicolor age of ours, we can consider this as androgynous, that with the characteristics of a female on the outside, like a transsexual male to female, but with a core that is biologically male. Pretty much the same way. The only way that air, this mixture of gases that we breathe, has ever been created is by the heating of the female element with the male element, up to the point of producing gas, breaking down the water into air. So indeed, we now understand that there's a female core to air. It is a female element that was heated enough that now it has male characteristics to display, like a female to male transsexual. And saying transsexuals, and we're going to touch upon that, isn't politically correct. I have to say transgender. For me, being of the old generation, I still correct myself by correcting myself and allowing myself to correct myself. I do a service to everyone around me as well. And we can see what I was talking about in the elements themselves. And they're much more ancient than astrology. We can see the only two differentiating elements truly are fire and water, and the other two are carbon copies of the first two, with two lines, one signifying the heavens and one signifying the earth. And some say these are the lines that are the remnants of the other triangle that was there before the element shape shifted. And in this world of ours today, we do not find two genders anymore. It's a plethora, and everybody is allowed in the age of Aquarius to have their own unique identity, making this a much more tolerant, accepting world for all of us, not just for people with gender issues, and with a deeper understanding of what it is we need as human beings. There's some great graphics in TSER. It's a Trans Student Educational Resources. You can take them from there if you need to educate somebody about this and share the information. So it's all public, at least the educational ones are. So the new gender paradigm says that our gender identity could be female, male, or other. It's non-binary, and it could shift. So can our gender expression. My gender identity can be one thing. I could feel very feminine inside, but I'll still be very masculine on the outside. And sex assigned at birth could be a totally third thing altogether. And here's two more attributes we add into the mix. I could be physically attracted to males, but much more emotionally attracted to females. You know, I can have amazing sex with males, but you know, you can't talk to these creatures. I need a female to do that, to feel comforted. So we learn much more about ourselves through being exposed to these anomalies. And through accepting these anomalies, these alternative ways of living and expressing yourself into the mainstream of society. And what we need to learn as practitioners, as therapists, as astrologers, is in order to truly connect to our client in these days, day and age, at least in the Western world, we need to assume nothing. And here is where I'm starting to share my own story. I'm working with NGOs for most of my life, and I've been working with trans rights organizations for a long time. And I met people that are taller than me. I'm 6'4", 195 meters, that are taller and bigger than me, that identify as female. And women who are a picture of femininity want to identify as male. So again, hearts, not parts, is what counts. And you can never tell by looking at a person what they feel inside. And if you really want to be politically correct and you know there's this kind of theme with this client, you can ask them, what pronouns do I use? And many new pronouns came up and came down, and it's okay, you know, they and we. I just love we, you know, more than everybody, more than everything else. But there were some really weird ones that came up over the last few years. Let's skip them. So these are just things for us as practitioners to learn. Do not say transgendered, say transgender. Do not say intersex, say intersex. And people going through transition, not transsexuals or people going through sex change, by rather gender affirming surgery or a reconstructive surgery or hormonal replacement therapy. And it's good to know how these kinds of souls have shaped what indeed we mentioned today as well. So first of all, not all trans people identify as male or female. And trans folks have many different sexual orientations. So the fact that I'm transgender doesn't mean that I need to be attracted to the opposite sex. Trans people are usually very socially active and politically active. And indeed, trans people led the Stonewall riots. Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson were two among many, many trans women of color that were on the front lines. Not all trans people want surgery at all, and even fewer people do get it. Let's go ahead. There are no trans regrets. Research shows that smashing percentage of people are happy with the result of their transition. Only about 4 to 6% actually regret. Why do these people coming in as our clients, as the parents of trans people or people with gender issues or having these issues themselves, why do they need our support? So look at these staggering differences. Life satisfaction, people with parental support, with people around them to actually be their network, 72% reported life satisfaction versus 33%. High self-esteem, 64, only 13%. Faced housing problems, 0% versus a staggering 55%. And look at this, described their mental health as very good, 70% and only 15%. And I know these statistics. I know their faces. Suffered depression, 23% only versus 75%. And attempted suicide, 4% versus 57%. So it is important. I'm going to jump ahead because I want to give you some more information. I think we can see gender and orientation through the chart. And we need to evaluate the feminine and masculine aspects in the natal chart and how much masculine and how much feminine energy is in the chart and how much androgynous energy is in the chart, if you will, and how it affects their expression or depression of their feminine or masculine energy. So I would suggest that power buildup in these areas, either a lot of feminine energy or a lot of masculine energy in these places, would greatly affect how this person would express their gender. And I want you to keep on exploring this. And there's much more information here, but since time is up, we can maybe go through this at a different time, but I think I left you with a lot of places. I would, of course, look for influence on the AC, DC, MC, and IC, and the North and South nodes as well. We all know of the Capricorn 4-10 axis, Capricorn Cancer axis, as being active with people with gender issues. And it goes on and on and on. I want to jump to the end of this and say that it's very much a mixture of these energies of feminine and masculine, Mars and Venus in the chart, that come up in a lot of the charts. And we can't go through all of this. I want to go to, okay, so, and also stars. Look at what Marcus Molinas wrote 2,000 years ago about Alcyone, for instance, and you'll see why I'm heading there. So he said, they will smooth their hairy limbs with porous promise, loathing their manhood and craving slickness of arm, and adopt feminine dress, footwear done not for wear but for show, and an affected effeminate gait. They are ashamed of their sex, as in gay, okay? And he wrote this in the 1st century AD, people affected by Alcyone. And again, it's a mixture of Mars and Venus. Spica is as well, and Alatir is as well. And I started exploring this because of my own chart. I was born with Alcyone on my sun. I am now a month and a half away from hormone replacement therapy, okay? I'm totally smooth, totally smooth. And well, I haven't gone out and changed my dress yet, but I'm getting there. It's a process, and it's a process of accepting oneself. So I had to explore that, first of all, for personal reason. Look at Spica at my North Node. But even as you know, traditional astrologers seeing, or classical astrologers seeing Uranus in retro on my ascendant in Scorpio is enough to know there's something there. So it was a very personal journey for me. And I think this journey is beneficial not only for me, but for the people around me as well. And it's liberating for all of us. So I want to thank you. And of course, for any questions you have on this, if you want to explore this together, I'd love you to contact me. And thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Boaz. It was beautiful. Very, very interesting. In fact, it brought up a lot of thoughts for me, and I've made notes, as I tend to do. The whole concept of philosophy was designed for men in the ancient world. Now, this is the beginning of Western civilization, right? Like Gandhi said, it was a good idea, shame it's not working. Yeah, we're very funny guys out there in the philosophical world. But I mean, it's funny because you just showed your own chart, and I'm not into interpreting your chart without permission, but I'm going to do it.
You got permission.
Well, you have a Mars-Venus conjunction, and it's in your 6th house, and which has to do with the body, because the 6th house is Virgo, and it's the body, and the soul is the opposite house, the Pisces house. And so what we ended up, when I saw that, I thought that this comes, and I'm not a spook, this comes out of a past life. And it's a recollection of the current soul that it has indeed experienced both and now would like to live it out. I mean, that just seemed very straight to me. And then the other thing, it was really funny because my 2 very closest friends in my entire life were both gay, and they were men, and they were real men. I mean, there was nothing feminine about them. I mean, aside from cruising and so on, which is very masculine. Women tend to stand still on corners when they're soliciting.
Yeah, we're kind of more active that way.
I think there's a lot more activity. It's very male. So there's, I've never noticed, effeminacy in my 2 gay friends who are very, very famous, very well known. And I never noticed any effeminacy in them at all, except for the way they thought. So it really was.
But were they allowed? Do you think, Erin, that day and age,
no,
if they would have traded?
Even rock, that was the thing, is in the 60s and all the rock stars, there were a lot of gay guys, but boy, they didn't come out. They might have been drumming like crazy or blowing the sax or, but there was no coming out. It was not allowed. It would have been absolutely horrifying, even to my generation. And I was born in 47,
Wow.
which was quite some time ago, really. And I'm beginning to feel it, actually. And it's a bit tiresome. But then
You look amazing.
I guess that's the whole point, really, isn't it? It's about looking. How do I look?
Yeah.
And how do I
As
feel?
Uranian agents of change and progress, all we want
Thank
to
you.
do is just look better. You know?
Just what I need is someone in between to tell me I look great. Fabulous. Thank you.
Exactly. You know,
I'm hearing it
I'm
from both
such a
sides.
spiritual person, and here I am. I'm 42 years old, and I'm going through.
Oh, you're having your Uranus return, so that you're becoming.
I'm having my Uranus opposition.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sorry,
Yeah,
sorry.
and it's on my ascendant.
Yeah. So yeah,
Ascendant, descendant.
yeah, I'm crossing underneath.
Wearing
So
my Saturn.
in the hidden side of the horoscope, it would have transited all the way up to the descendant, which is at midlife, and it's often at midlife where we really can come out of whatever entrapment, because we feel that we're old enough now that we can make our own decisions, and a lot of decisions get made around gender in that time frame. It's not unusual for a married couple for the husband to come out and they stay married. It's not a problem.
I know. I come from a very open-minded society. I'm the son of two hippies, but I was flabbergasted because I was always afraid of coming out.
Yeah.
Sorry?
No, my kids were saying they were raised by hippies, basically.
Yeah. So both my parents are hippies, but I was dumbfounded because I was always afraid of coming out because I was afraid of the public shunning me away. And I always thought that my closest circles would support me, but it was the complete opposite. The closest circles detached and deteriorated, and I got so much love and support from my clients and students and just people that that are a bit further.
Well, I
that was very
totally
encouraging.
understand, because like my mother remarried after a divorce, and then she had a boy who's 16 years younger than me. And so my brother, he has always been gay. So it's never been a problem because he's just 57 now, and it was all, but the problem is that he was beaten up every single day in elementary school. He'd come home black and blue, and mom would never, acknowledge the possibility of why or anything, but that they were all the, a-holes, and that he was a good boy, good little boy. And he was sort of a good little boy until he got to be into his teens, and then he stopped being a good little boy and was on the streets, basically. Yeah, I mean, this is what happens to kids. Wow. And he was on the streets, and so jumping into the present now, after all these years, he's head of the Dr. Peters Center, because he's moved on, in Vancouver, British Columbia. He's was the one that instigated the clean shooting up rooms, type really radical,
So
and
I had a very hard time as a kid, I didn't have this jawline.
I would love to say something at this stage, because I hear you guys talking about adolescence, and I just want to say, during adolescence, we have the Jupiter return at 12, and then 2 years later, it's the Jupiter is gone all around zodiac and is sextiling its natal place at the same time that Uranus is making its first Ptolemaic aspect to its natal position, a sextile as well, at the age of 13. Now, at that stage, everybody's having problems. Everybody's having problems because this is so much energy to manage, and everyone can't manage it. But I just want to say that we all got to take a deep breath. And parents and teachers, if we just understood this. Now, what we do in education is that we force everybody to go through this terrible stage all at the same time, right? And we force the younger children, the Jupiter return children at the age of 11 and 12, to experience it at the same time the older children go through it too. So everyone's going through this horrible time, and they have teachers that can't manage because there's not enough teachers to deal with it. right? So the whole entire educational system is very badly managed, and it's just a very defective system.
Terrible.
And I kind of lost the thought of what I was going to say, but I something about what you said, Boaz, made me want to just raise this issue and just sort of say we're dealing with a damaged system, and we have to do something about this. And one of the things I think that parents can do to help their children is to hire a tutor who can work with a child one-to-one for maybe an hour a week on any subject. Pick your subject, English, math, science, or whatever it's going to be. Because having a one-to-one tutor is going to make a huge difference as opposed to having one teacher teaching 30 children. And I think it's going to help a lot. And also, I think the issues that might come up around gender and equality is going to be something that's going to be easier to deal with than one single teacher dealing with it.
Alex, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, glad to hear
comments. We'll now move along to Ari Moshe Wolfe. Please go ahead, Ari.
Okay. Hey, hi Erin. Hello everyone.
Hi there. Hi again. I don't
Hi.
see the little one. Oh well.
The little one is elsewhere, but yes. Sorry for being late. I don't know if that was an issue earlier. So that was so beautiful, Boaz. Thank you for sharing. This is such an interesting topic, and there are a few things I'm going to speak to here. The first thing that I want to say is, since we were speaking about Uranus, it's helpful to point out that when we go beyond Saturn, gender is not a thing. Right? Once we go beyond Saturn, we're moving beyond all constructs of time, space, form, boundaries, parameters, definitions, anything that can manifest within duality. Uranus reflects the projected intelligence of Creator. It's the mind of God. So when we're in Uranian realm, it's all archetypes. It's essence. And when we see the unfolding of phenomena within time and space and form and sequence, we're actually perceiving from a Uranian point of view the one expression of life manifesting apparently in our own time-based experience, which is entirely subjective, but it's not original, it's not primary to existence, it's secondary. It's a function of our own individuated consciousness that brings us into time-based perception. But it's not original. That God's mind, so to speak, Creator, isn't thinking in time, isn't thinking in separation, isn't thinking in any binary terms at all. And so when we're operating within a Uranian consciousness, it's all profoundly impersonal. It's entirely objective. And from the point of view of the individual soul, Uranus corresponds to the individuality. Like each soul has its own individual essence. It's its own archetypal, perfect divine quality of being that is metaphorically represented in our personalities, in our bodies, in our unique structural constructs of self, but none of that is who we are. These are all just temporary constructs. But just like your body is unlike every other body, it's a metaphor for the total individuality of everything within creation. And from that perspective, we have this Uranian principle that everything in creation is totally individualistic. It is whole and complete. It is one with Creator. And there's nothing new and there's nothing old. It's one ecosystem containing all of its parts, and all of the parts exist within. It is only our allegiance to a more Saturn time-based perception of experience that keeps us operating in this seemingly very real experience of sequential time, other, and separation. Like for me to communicate and for us to have this conversation today, we're needing to organize ourselves within time and space through a Zoom meeting at a certain time that works for all of us. But from the point of view of essence, there aren't these huge spans of separation between all of us, where there's a need to create this form and this structure in order to communicate with one another. Everything is already complete, and the web of consciousness is able to access all of itself because it's not defined or limited to time. This is in the same way that when we're dreaming and we're less defined by time and space, it's easier for us in our own individuated consciousness, especially if we're a little more lucid during the dream state. It's easier for us to access other people and information and to have experiences. But it's simply because we're not as defined by our perceptions of time and space and limitation. Now, I start with that because the mistake that most humans make, and this is true with astrology definitely, and also in general, is we begin to look at ourselves and look at reality and look at the natal chart with the false premise that the foundation for reality is Saturnian. And so we'll look at ourselves and we'll say, okay, you know, how does this chart describe your personality? How does this chart describe your hobbies, your traits, your gifts, your challenges? And it's easy to interpret everything from the point of view, from the reference point of a separated self. So you, Ari Moshe, in this male form body, identified as a man, with this genitalia, with these particular desires, these particular interests, this particular social economic conditioning, this color skin, this cultural background, that's you. Now let's look at your chart and, you know, sort of understand how you operate. And what I like to do is, in a way, go the other direction. I like to look at the appearance of another, the manifestation of other, and start with this very humble and open-minded curiosity. That's an interesting way to manifest. This is a very unique and specific way of experiencing yourself within the constructs of time and space. What does this reflect about you? And you are not defined by any construct, by any binary. But what does it say about what you're discovering, what you're claiming, what you are remembering, your unique path of unraveling and remembering the oneness? So I like to think of everything that exists within time and space and form and separation, including all binaries, sexual and gender binaries, including our desires and the focus of attraction, what we're drawn to, what we're not drawn to, as the unique and temporary ways that each one of us within our lifetime and within a particular period of time within a lifetime are drawn to experience ourselves through a particular construct of form and time and space. It's a mechanism, it's a vehicle of learning. And when we take all forms and all binaries and all, because once we're in the world of form and time and space, there are dualities, right? Once this is me, I'm going to have to find a way to find you. Once me is defined by this body, that means other bodies are going to be out there and they're not going to be here now. In spirit, there's nothing beyond here and now. In Uranian realm, everything exists now. And you can trace back everything within time to now. Just, tangentially, this is why along our spiritual journey, we all in our own ways might begin to experience snippets or moments of past lives or future lives that resonate with aspects of our experience. The more we begin to unravel the core desires, the core energetic imprints, the underlying attachments that we're working out, the aspects of self-remembering that we're working out, we can see behind the circumstantial realities of our life, behind the people and the specifics of the people, place, persons, and things, and begin to see the matrix underneath it. that's been operative for lifetimes and will continue to be operative because it resonates with how we are created and how life is. The clearer our mind is, the more we can see things as they actually are, the less we'll be operating and playing this game from this perspective of taking things very seriously and taking the metaphor literally. So everything becomes more lucid. And we begin to see, oh, okay, and this is a Uranian friendship. It's like, wow, we're just here together, all these aspects of creation, one. Like we are one. Everything within the galaxy and solar systems, every species here on Earth, we're all here together, here now. And how interesting the incredible infinite diversity of forms in which we choose to express in the unraveling and remembering of that oneness. So I start with this point because when we look at the chart, we can orient from this immense curiosity that says there is not separation. There is not a duality. There is not a space and there is not a gap between what we are and what we are becoming. That our wholeness and our unity is already intact and what we are is not defined by anything within time and space. It creates a big, wide open field to look at gender, to look at sexuality, to look at form, to look at bodies, and to have no preconceived opinions, no preconceived judgment, no fixed beliefs or ideas, because none of that has anything to do with who we are. They're all tools, learning constructs used and engaged temporarily according to our own purposes of awakening. Any meaning we give to form, besides for that, values it as its own God. It gives it this false prominence, this false importance of having meaning unto itself for its own sake. And so I like to really encourage this big taking a step back so that we don't look at a chart and say, oh, this is who you're supposed to love. This is who you're supposed to be attracted, or these are your sexual needs. These are the ways you're supposed to relate to boundaries and relationship. These are the forms of relationship. And this is how it's meant to be, etc. Because just as much as spirit is inherently unconditioned, undefined, ungraspable, infinite, it directly implies that form is infinite. That the number of ways for the undefined, for the unconditioned to temporarily explore conditioning must be infinite. If it was finite, then the unconditioned wouldn't be so infinite. If there was only a limited ways of experiencing binaries and dualities and form, then the formless and the infinite would be limited. So it must mean, in appreciating the wholeness and the unity and the limitlessness of our true being, putting essence and love and unity before the manifestation of form, that when it comes to the appearance of form and time and space and dualities, there is literally infinite ways. By the way, the word infinite in finite. It's interesting to think about it that way. So I want to move to this Kabbalistic notion. There's this teaching that, source is described as Ein Sof, which means no end. And that's, one of the most accurate ways to describe that which can't be described. So no end. That's one of the Kabbalistic notions of it. And in the Kabbalistic literature, there's two ways of describing the phenomena of a miracle. Or we can say there are two ways of creation coming about. There's this concept of yesh meyesh or yesh me'ayin. Yesh meyesh is creating something from something. Yesh me'ayin is creating something from nothing. In Bereshit it says, it uses the word tohu vavohu. It's sort of like an infinite dark void. In Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim va'aretz va'aretz haya tohu vavohu. God created heavens and the earth, and reality was tohu vavohu. In the Tao, it describes The Tao is darkness within darkness. We often think of masculine and feminine, or even male and female, as opposites. But what I want to represent here is that opposites don't exist, and thus we can think of all dualities not as a manifestation of opposites, but as two different ways of embodying and playing the game and the dance of the present moment. So here's a picture of a black screen. And let's just say that this represents darkness. The funny thing is, not one of us who is looking at this black screen is actually looking at darkness. We couldn't apprehend or see darkness if there wasn't light. And darkness isn't the opposite of light. And that's where yesh meyesh, creation from creation, is what we're all familiar with, right? We can take a tree and make something from the tree. We can take a concept and build upon the concept. We're just working with the existing materials of what is. But yesh me'ayin, creation from nothing, is incomprehensible. Because before something was nothing. And to conceive of the idea of nothing preceding nothing is so contrary to our Saturnian way of thinking. But I would like to suggest that this primordial nothingness is the feminine, is the only true original feminine. I think Boaz was saying something similar about Pisces. Maybe I'm mistaking that, maybe it was someone else. The only true original feminine, in the way that I'm describing it, from this perspective, is that infinite void where there isn't even something. It's prior to all of creation. It precedes everything to the point that it doesn't even precede it, because preceding means time. So it's incomprehensible. We can experience it without thought. We can experience it in giving ourselves to it. Linda's about to say something. There you go. There's that bell. Okay. And so I guess that's a 5-minute bell, I'm assuming. I got here late, so I'll just take it as 5-minute bell.
No, 1 minute.
1 minute. All right. Sounds good. I'll speed it up here then. All other polarities and constructs of male and female, feminine, masculine are working with perceptions of opposites that aren't accurate. Like there's no such thing as, no one here has experienced darkness, ever. When the lights go out, it's the absence of light. And you can always make it more dark. You can like go into a room with like really thick walls and, you know, a scientific experiment where it's like really dark. You can go into a black hole and that's really dark. Darkness can always be increased by removing light. And so it's something to think about, that the construct, the whole duality, the whole dynamic of polarities that we experience it is really just perceiving substance and deriving context by shifting the substance that we're perceiving, right? Understanding darkness relative to light. And so I want to end this by just exemplifying this astrologically. This is a chart of someone right now. Notice that in the traditional astrological pedagogy, we have, you know, Aries is opposite Libra, Capricorn is opposite Cancer, Aquarius is opposite Leo, but these signs are not gender polarities. Like Aries is masculine, it's young. So is Libra, it's also masculine, right? Aquarius and Leo are also yang, they're also masculine charged. Cancer and Capricorn are traditionally feminine or yin. And just to point out that the general polarities that we perceive are not these opposites. And I'm very much in the same boat, I think, as what I heard Boaz saying, that the tendencies to call certain signs masculine or feminine, I don't really resonate with that, because it's a polarity, it's a binary that doesn't actually exist. I deeply resonate with the notion of Pisces and Cancer and Scorpio being feminine, in the sense that they all relate in some form to that which cannot be grasped or defined or held. When we start to understand astrology, and we acknowledge that polarities, binaries, are not original to creation, we can just start to appreciate that the way that we're choosing to identify with them, the way we're relating to them, is more specific to what we find is relevant and necessary for us. And I'll close with this thought, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. To me, the dance of masculine and feminine, which is metaphorically represented often in the dance between man and woman, but not always, and ultimately it's inside of us. It's really the dance of life with itself in the present moment. The infinite void of darkness, the source from which everything comes, is incomprehensible. And when we make love, when we sing, when we're in devotion, we approach a unity where the past and the future and the self and the other don't exist anymore. When we're in a vibration of love and unity and true devotion, we are dancing with this place of return that is always here. It's never been away. And that the entirety of our journey here on this earth, dancing with one another, is just this poetic relationship and courtship of life with the present moment. And so hopefully we can consider that when we look at charts and we just hold more space to really feel into these energies and to see how is this dance manifesting for this person. And we can't look at a chart and know a person's gender. We can't look at a chart and know a person's body. We can't look at a chart and know any of those things. We have to find that from the person and correlate it to the chart and say, okay, here's how we can understand the chart. This is the way, this is the dance, this is the form that this chart is showing up in, reflecting how the soul is working with these archetypes. We can never look at a chart without connecting with the soul and understand how the soul is playing with duality. Okay, hopefully that was clear. Thank you all so much for allowing me to share.
Thank you very much, Ari Moshe. And Erin, any comments?
Yes, I would like to. And thank you very much for your presence. It was wonderful. It's very poetic, what you were saying. Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
It brought up three things for me in particular, which I made a note of. And one of them was that I wouldn't even get out of bed in the morning if I didn't have Mars in my chart. Yeah? I mean, it's the one that actually pokes me in the behind and in my mind saying, you better get up and start doing stuff and get to work and start thinking like a man. So the other thing that comes up is when you mentioned that Saturn is the boundary of the outer planets, which mean we had choice. And it was when the time of Uranus was sighted that this actually started breaking through, where it was, the beginning of the suffragette movement. Mm. And, I'll tell you a little story, because this is what I tend to do, is that one day I was living in London, living in St. John's Wood. And the thing about living in London is that there's always somebody outside with a jackhammer, yeah? Like pounding away and getting at the pipes. And no matter what you do, you're stumbling over a workman somewhere. It's really quite amusing. The problem is that I was writing retrograde planets and I was working on Mars. I couldn't think, so I had to get out. So I go to the library where John Etherington was running it. And there was a guy in there, and I'd never met him before. And he said, I'm so-and-so, and what's your name? And I said, I'm Erin Sullivan. He said, oh, yes, that's what I thought. And I said, he said, well, what are you doing here? And so I told him my little story about the jackhammers. And he said, you know what? He says, I'm not only an astrologer, but I'm also a professional researcher. And I've been asked by a group of suffragette followers to do research on the horoscopes of the suffragettes. And he found that there was because I was writing on Mars retrograde when I left my apartment, fled my apartment from jackhammer outside, got it. And he said that he had discovered that the majority of the statistical average, a consistent one, showed that the majority of the suffragettes had Mars retrograde.
Mm.
And I thought that was fantastic. I mean, we talked for an hour in there because of this. And I thought about that more and more. And it's that it takes a Mars retrograde to start a revolution. And when we start moving to the boundary of Saturn and the outer planets, then we have choices. The choices, which are to be whatever you choose to be as an individual, Uranus, as a spirituality, Neptune. A lot of shape-shifting going on in the religions during that time, the sighting of Neptune. Also the sighting of oil, also the most important part of the Neptune part in the American horoscope, which is now being assaulted. And also then we end up with Pluto, which, as I said, is a shapeshifter. Yeah, I mean, he kind of takes care, like a mother, of the shades, who are simply people hovering around in the underworld waiting to be reincarnated. It's not the blazing hell of the Christians. And then the other thing that crossed my mind when you were talking was that, the client who told me I would have been about 23 when I was just beginning to do horoscopes. And this would have been sort of 1973, 74, and 73, when this man said that I thought like a man. And I mean, I thought about that a lot afterward. And I thought, okay, I wonder what that meant and what that means. Well, I do have the sun in Scorpio on the ascendant exactly in a square to Mars, to Pluto, Mars, and Saturn in the 9th house. And that might be part of the scholarly aspect of my mind and the way it works, which automatically doesn't include women in the scholarship. And Marie Curie, there's a picture of her with like 60 men and her in the middle at Harvard, or not Harvard, sorry, at the Sorbonne, at the university. She was like so rare in her field, and she won 2 Nobel Prizes, one of which she wasn't almost allowed to go to Sweden to get because she was having an affair. Her husband had died, so she wasn't cheating on him, but she was having an affair with a man who was married. So she was threatened not to get her prize in Stockholm because she was having an affair with a man. And when you think of what these women have gone through, you know, the whole historical aspect of the feminine and its drive and desire, because I'm full of passion, drive, and desire, or else I'm massively depressed. You know, it's a kind of a flip go. You know, how do I get out of the depression? By doing something, by getting my Mars up, getting dressed, doing the things that make it alive, making the coffee, having the cigarette. I'm so jealous he's smoking. I roll my own, by the way. Which is very masculine. I roll my own cigarettes, perfect ones. And I only smoke a few. But there is this whole thing about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto offering us options in consciousness, but also options in genderism. So that there was more freedom that occurred during the suffragette period, during the Uranus return and the Neptune coming into being, where there was mesmerism and all sorts of very feminine types of activities going on.
Can I make a quick point about Mars retrograde? I feel it's very relevant. I've seen in so many charts, you know, Mars retrograde archetype in general so often speaks to where that function is undergoing such an introspective, inverted process.
Right.
So I've seen it for a lot of women. They don't relate to the traditional gender stereotypes or notions of how a woman's supposed to express. And they actually go through this process of connecting with this oomph and this anger and this drive to embody and to express. And actually I've seen for a lot of men, the Mars retrograde oftentimes manifesting as this sort of hesitancy. I mean, I've seen this for women too, this hesitancy around that drive. And, you know, it could be this otherwise impulse to be angry and aggressive. So that Mars retrograde is so linked to this whole question around gender and gender stereotypes that are
No,
put onto us, because
I think what you're saying is really important, and I think it demands another research project where we look at Mars retrograde and see exactly what that's about, because the whole issue of introjecting your Mars can actually kill you in the end. And it can put you in a dangerous position. Like, for instance, a man who has interjected his Mars and yet he's out cruising the street at night could easily get attacked. Yeah. So what we're looking at in the horoscope when we talk about Mars retrograde in this case, because that guy came up, and also the boundary and Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and we're talking to men, we need to talk to them about the feminine function in their character, nature, interior life. Not that they're walking around limp-wristed or anything, acting it out, but just that you know, the whole issue of Mars and sexuality and gender plays a huge role. And it is the planet. I mean, there are only two feminine planets in the horoscope, right? There's the moon and Venus. The rest are masculine. And so
arguably too.
So pardon?
Arguably. I can argue on Venus even, but yeah.
Well, Venus actually has, she has a dual nature herself, because there's Venus Pandemos and the babies, and then the male ideology, you know, of the higher mind, the philosophy, the love of wisdom, you know, ruled by her Aphrodite Urania. So what we're looking at here in the horoscope is that it doesn't actually define or show gender. It doesn't show gender definition. Okay, I mean, the guy is sitting there, the female is sitting there, but it does not. And at the same time, it does, the horoscope can show where we're more encouraged to live out the dominant masculine side. In my case, through Sun, Square, Mars, Saturn, Pluto. But I also have Moon, Neptune, sextile, Jupiter, Venus. So when I was born, I thought it was going to be a party. And then I looked up and I went, oh my God. And then it began.
Okay, thank you. Erin and Ari, fantastic. Let's now move to Sarah DeHaven. Please go ahead, Sarah.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, really interesting conversation. There's no doubt about it. I just wanted to say I made notes as well based on what everyone said so far. So I want to touch on that real quick and then go into my slides, because I kind of went ham on the slides, you guys. I can't wait to share. So yeah, in my case with my presentation, I just want to be clear, I'm using gender as a term more in the metaphysical sense. It's not so much about biological sex in humans and animals. So I know when it comes to, and man, we got Lucifer in a gibbous inconjunct to Saturn right now. So
excuse me, I'm not, I'm not getting anything on the screen. I'm just getting a photograph of Ari.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I don't have it up on the screen yet, Erin. But actually I'll put that up actually right now, just so that I have it and there's no issues going on there. Can you see it now?
Yes. I do. I see your, yes, thank you.
Perfect. All right, awesome. All right, so yeah, like in the context here with me, I'm using gender more based on a metaphysical term. I also want to touch really briefly on Boaz's element chart, talking about the pure form of feminine being water and the pure form of masculine being fire. I love that. And then more androgyny blending in earth and air. So I just wanted to give thumbs up to that, because that's totally going into the vein of what I'm talking about today as well. And then I also want to reiterate, of course, we can't determine biological sex based off of a chart alone. So anything I say, I just want to be very clear that I'm not insinuating that in any way, shape, or form. And another thing too, is love for the vessel, I find, is so key. Like if we want to express the gender within us, the blend, the texture, the flavors, the dimensions, the frequencies of gender that exists within us, we must love what we are within here in the physical realm, because at least from my belief system and what I've been learning so far, I feel spirit exists on all planes, which means that, you know, this is a spiritual realm just as much as any other. Let's see. So I do want to say too, just the retrograde Mars thing was really cool, because when I think about an internal Mars, you know, it's, if we think about masculine yang energy, positive energy or whatever. It wants to move outward. It's outward moving energy. So of course, if Mars is moving inwards, it's just a funny thing to think about, because that is definitely a frustrated Mars. So those are some things I just wanted to touch on very briefly to acknowledge everyone who's spoken so far.
Closer to Earth when it's retrograde, isn't it?
What's that?
It's closer to Earth when it's retrograde.
Oh, that's true. That's true too. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. So I just want to say, I don't think astrology is gender biased. And I think Erin was talking about that a bit earlier as well. I feel like it's more a bit gender biased. And that has to do with, I feel, just where we're at this point as a species, where we're at in perspective. And of course, this is changing very rapidly with the Pluto and Capricorn generation, the south nodes, of so many planets being in Capricorn, and us revisiting those with Saturn being in where it is in its degree in Capricorn, and Pluto. There's a lot of transformation with our relationship to gender and what it even means, you know? And so, yeah, the deeper we go into the imbalance of gender in ourselves and in humanity, we can see that both genders play an integral role to the weaving of the very fabric of reality. And so, yeah, I just posed the question again, and I'm looking right now, the principle of gender, aka the generative principle. This is all from the Kybalion. It's a Hermetic text that speaks about natural laws and principles that govern consequence in the universe. So when I'm using a term gender, again, I'm talking more in a metaphysical sense. And I find it really interesting when I think about gender and the root etymology of this word. And it's actually apparently, and now this is a rumor, but apparently the Masons, once you reach the 33rd degree, you learn that the G in the Freemasonry, that symbol there with the compass and the square, the G actually stands for generative, which is an interesting tidbit. It's a rumor, I don't know, I can't confirm. I've never made it to the 33rd degree because I'm not a man, and I guess I, just haven't put the effort in. But the point is generation. In order for the universe to exist, life on some level and varying degrees needs to exist, and without the two halves of the whole, the masculine and feminine, it's impossible. And so gender, from the Kybalion, here's a quote: gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes, and the masculine and feminine in this case is yin and yang, positive, negative, these types of things. It's more not the biological sex. So if gender is in everything, it must stand to reason, I would think, in at least my line of logic, that everything is built from a combination of masculine and feminine energy in varying ratios, colors, flavors, frequencies, and textures. And we're exploring that as people in these days, in the coming, or I guess in the recent years, the recent decades, especially though, it seems to be coming to a head where, as we move out of the distorted patriarchal paradigm that we've existed within for so long, and people come closer to who it is they are in the relationship with themselves, it's just inevitable that we're going to be expressing and tapping into energies that don't meet, up until this point, traditional societal paradigms and labels, right? And so, we do see, even in things that we describe as neutral or neither, varying degrees of yin and yang, like with Mercury, right? And so I wanted to focus on Mars and Venus for this very short presentation, just because there's some interesting things about Mars and Venus. You'll notice that Mars tends to describe how we go after what we want, how we pursue our desires. And Venus often depicts how we relate to ourselves, others, and the world, and how we attract versus how we pursue what we desire, attraction and repulsion. Two key elements or key points when it comes to like the fabric of the universe, the law of polarity from a Hermetic perspective. So on the physical plane, we can see that light, aka source, God, goddess, the all, or data, as is the word that I'm liking these days. We can perceive that light through the four elements here on the physical plane. And much about how these elements express in the feminine and masculine can be derived through observation of these elements, just by looking around us in the world, by seeing how the elements operate within ourselves, other people, nature, animals, and science. And there's probably a lot of other ways we can observe it too. So looking into Venus, I just wanted to say, you know, Venus, people will say, well, Venus is a feminine planet. And at its core, archetypically, you know, we could agree there's yin qualities for sure. But it is ruling two signs that, well, one is feminine and one is considered masculine. And I like how Boaz touched on how air is a more androgynous element, because air and earth, both of them are kind of androgynous in a sense. But anyways, I'm kind of digressing here. But my point is that we can see even in masculine how we go after what we want. We could have a more yin approach to that. We can have a more overt approach to that. And with femininity, we can find the qualities of Venus in earth and in air, you know, in our security, both somatic and social, which I'm going to talk a little bit about here. And as you can see, I put a yin yang here because I like how they're in the yin yang, we have the dot of white and the dot of black, which implies that in this construct, even though polarity is a principle of natural law, it's going to be very hard to find an absolute extreme of either, feminine or masculine, anywhere you go. You know, I mean, we're just not there yet to really have pierced that veil entirely to fully know with proof what kind of extremes could exist. But I don't think any of us have run across those yet, you know? And so anyway, touching on Mars real quick, we can see Mars in Aries, which is a masculine planet ruled by a masculine sign, Aries. And the effort or focus of Aries is often to initiate. It's overt, it's out in the open. It's about kind of piercing past and through, moving forward, right? Cardinal. And in a sense, the instinct to separate. Now I know with tradition or with evolutionary astrology, Scorpio, Pluto, the soul, desire, it's the, you know, with evolutionary astrology, we're looking at the how we evolve through separation and reunion. So I don't want to confuse people here, but when I think about cardinal Aries, it is kind of separating. It's a beginning, right? Separating from that conjunction, I guess we could say that 0 point. And then we've got Mars in Scorpio, which is still a planet that is action oriented, but it's a different type of action. It's yin action. So it's going to respond rather than initiate. It's going to be more covert rather than overt, generally based on the energies, right? From my perspective, of course. And where Aries is out in the open, Scorpio is behind closed doors. And it pierces deeply into, it observes Scorpio. So it has, instead of the impulse to move out and forward, in a sense, like in that direction moving of energy, not in the evolutionary sense. Scorpio shows us the impulse to merge and absorb into oneself. And so we can see Aries as the pursuit of desire and impulse, and Scorpio could be seen as the intuitive pursuit of desire, feeling driven action. Now we can see all of us can embody these energies, regardless of our gender, regardless of our biological sex, regardless of the individual that we are. There's going to be varying ratios of these archetypes, even if we don't have Aries and Scorpio in our chart, which I'll go over a little bit in a second here if I have the time. And so we see too, although Venus is a feminine planet archetypically, it expresses itself through both masculine and feminine energy types out of necessity, just like Mars. It's necessity. It can't be one or the other in this kind of a universe where there's a blend of gender. And so we got Venus in Taurus, very feminine sign, Taurus, in a feminine planet. Although now that when I think about what Boaz was saying about the androgyny between earth and air, it's given me something to chew on here. But yeah, we see with Venus and Taurus, its effort and focus is going to be on pleasure, security, luxury, even comfort, pleasant sensations, rest, relaxation, and the big one here, homeostasis, right? Very important to life and growth and generation, that generative principle. And of course, self-reliance, right? Because we need to be in our feminine, we can't, well, for balanced feminine energy, security within ourselves and security in interdependent relationships is, you know, it's just healthy. And so, of course, Venus in Libra would be the masculine feminine, right? It's not an absolute one or the other. So Libra is, Venus in Libra is a feminine planet ruling a feminine or a masculine sign. And so we can see outward moving action versus that internal action we see in the yin elements like Scorpio and Taurus, or the yin signs and yin elements like earth and water, Scorpio, Taurus, right? We can see with Libra Venus outgoing, being outgoing, social, moving outward, wanting to be aesthetically pleasing for the outer world, right? And for ourselves in other ways too, which can blend into Taurus, but I won't digress too much there. We can see with a Libra energy too, there's mutual trust that inspires fair and balanced relations when it's iterating healthily, which also promotes a different type of homeostasis, which I've put at the bottom here. I've termed it social homeostasis, which is a relative sense of safety, versus Taurus, which would be, in my opinion, at least my perspective, an internal sense of safety. And so to work well with our own gender typologies, because we all have a blend, like I said, it's as unique as your own fingerprint, how gender is going to manifest through you or how you choose to express it. So to work well with our own gender typologies, we can consider the core of Venus and Mars. And if you're looking at your natal chart, your natal Venus and Mars are going to describe how the core typologies are operating through the two planets for you. So when I talk about the core typologies, I'm talking about that self-reliance, like with Taurus, and the interdependence, like with Libra, or in the sake of Mars, or in the case of Mars, how does the instinct to separate express through you? How does the instinct to merge express through you? It's all going to be dependent on your own natal chart, right? And so we see, again, here even more on that. It teaches us, Taurus at least, somatic awareness, self-esteem. It shows us how to connect to our needs for survival and comfort, and not even just about connecting to it. It's just kind of, it's there, right? Inherently, intrinsically, Taurus keywords. And Libra teaches us how to develop awareness of the needs of others, how we kind of fit in with regard to others. It teaches us how to interact and balance, and how to interact in balance with what exists around us, so that we are deriving that comfort and security that we need in order to evolve and grow. We can't just use, okay, so I'm almost done, I think. Yeah, okay, one more slide. So I'll just wrap up here. Aries, like Mars energy cannot move outward without having the time to rest and recuperate and to recalibrate, right? And so it is a sacred marriage, we could say, a sine wave that is working in cooperation. Aries teaches us to have the courage to fight when we're called to, and to do it without vacillating. Balance between Libra and Aries. And Scorpio teaches us how to grow stronger through our alliances with people, places, and objects of power, so that we're not an island, like if Taurus was in the extreme. And so just wrapping up here, I just want to say that there's no right or wrong way of expression in a universe that is evolving through experiences of all kinds. Who are we to judge? We can't. In fact, it is in our duty as a triple Capricorn, I would say it's our duty to be true to who we are. And that requires us to express ourselves in integrity to who it is we're called to be. And that is not always going to align with societal or traditional or cultural expectations. And this is why, as a Gestalt, it is truthful and helpful to know that we're all intrinsically who we're meant to be, right? This is important to know. The possibilities of how the god of war and how the goddess of love iterate through us both, individually and socially, culturally, have yet to be fully explored, like I was saying. So during this aeon of many planetary south nodes and north nodes in Capricorn and Cancer, and in this current Pluto and Capricorn generation, we still have a lot of exploration and challenge and discovery with regard to what the feminine and masculine are, right? We're still looking into that, and that's a scary, exciting, and wonderful thing. And so let's just continue to explore these things as we're called to do, and be courageous, so that we can learn more about how we're interfacing with our own mind, with the universal mind, with others, and the world that we live in. And that is all I wanted to share for today with my slides. So I'm going to stop my share. There we go. All right.
Erin.
Hi, I just see the most wonderful photograph of Moshe. I'm sure it's Moshe. Am I supposed to be on a screen? It doesn't matter. Sarah.
Oh yeah, no, sorry, Erin. Please go ahead. Yep.
No, yeah, I'm just talking to a face on the screen. I'm looking at everybody on the side, so I can still see you. But thank you so much. I really, it just gives us such an opportunity to think about the same thing on all these different levels. And it's just fantastic because I became, obviously I've already known about this, but I became acutely conscious of the yin and yang function. Mm-hmm. And the consideration of it in the Chinese, which didn't play out in the marriage department, in the whole philosophy of the I Ching, and how you could get a masculine line and a feminine line, and that 6 feminine lines would mark very good, and if you had 6 masculine lines, yang, then it was very strong and very, very threatening. But when we look at the 2 Venuses that I brought up earlier of Aphrodite Urania and Venus Pandemos of the people, the marrying, mothering one, and then Aphrodite Urania, the son of her, she's a motherless child. I mean, her father was the spawn of which she came. And I look at Venus in Taurus, which is feminine, and then we look at Venus in Libra, which is masculine. And so I'm really, becoming much more centered around, if you can be centered around something, theoretically, on the whole function of the planet Venus as the feminine force. Of course, we have the moon, which we didn't discuss deeply, mm-hmm. but the fact that she does appear to be in Taurus, Venus Pandemos, and in Libra, she would appear to be Venus Urania, the one who is the lover of philosophy, who is air, who mm-hmm. thought, who is the creator of art and music and all the things. Even if a woman doesn't have Venus in Libra, it is the function. So what we've been talking about is how do we deal with horoscopes and with all of our ideas? Does this help us, understand and meet with the horoscope in a way which is really holistic and blends with the individual? When we understand what we've done in this 2 hours, we've come to understand the myriad of opportunity to look at the horoscope in unique and different ways so that we can then integrate even more on the subject. Is astrology gender biased? Apparently to us it isn't. And apparently we see why, because it's obvious when you do something this deep and you look at all the research that got done, and we come up with Mars ruling Aries and also Scorpio. Therefore, it's thought to be, Scorpio is feminine because it's a water sign. But it's pretty dynamic as far as that kind of a water sign goes. And then Mars in Aries, which is the ruler of. And, Mars was usurped by Pluto, and that was only 1931. So Mars ruled Scorpio right up until 1931. 3 years later, Marie Curie dies, the discoverer of uranium and radium, and who actually was her colleague discovered uranium, and she discovered, and with her husband, and then she was going to be denied her award in Sweden, and she fought that, and she won, and she went, and she did accept her award. And so I think this whole business of binary thinking, I think it occurs in astrology. I've been an astrologer for a really long time, and I've been in a lot of groups. I've founded a lot of groups. I've taught, and it's so difficult to get people to break out of the habit. I'm just looking at my solar return up here. It's the moon at 7 Aries conjunct Chiron. And I'm going, oh my God, what does that mean for me, emotionally? I always paste my solar return up to my wall to remind me who I might become. And
you're not alone. I do that too, Erin.
It's really weird because I have Mars in Libra and the moon in Aries. And so here I have, you know, a masculine sign, a masculine planet, and then the moon, all by our little lonesome, the Mesopotamian of one of two feminines. I think what we want to get to here is that it's really important that we don't have binary thinking, that we have holistic thinking, and that we come to realize that each of us have masculine and feminine within us, and they rise up as needed. You know, if somebody were to break into my door right now, my masculine side would be pretty high. You
Exactly.
know, I'd be very, very concerned. Generally speaking, I'm fairly Venusian around my home, and my people walk into my house, everything's like balanced. It's, you know, art, creative, artistic stuff goes back centuries. And so, I mean, when I think in terms of the I Ching and it's yin and yang, I like that better than I do masculine, feminine, in the sense of that it comes out of a holistic consciousness, which is what this panel has been trying to demonstrate, and has done so fairly well as far as I've seen. And everybody has spoken very clearly on what we have to work with and how divine it is. And I really appreciate the bringing in of the divinity of what we do as astrologers, and how important it really is to assist people to come to terms with aspects of their own character, whether it's about sexuality or gender or not. Yeah, so we could even think, well, I mean, by gender is nothing. Everything is soul, you know, it's all part of what the planetary array and the natal horoscope has laid out for the person, for them to work through in a whatever kind of body they've got, whether it's one that seems to have been a terrible mistake, and you know they're about to make a change, or whether it's about someone who is like really into the feminine side of the self, which, by the way, if we think in terms of pole dancers, women, they're very feminine, and yet they are doing a masculine job. Okay.
Exactly. Yes.
I mean, a hooker is got a lot of Mars. There's no way.
Excuse me.
And we must also protect our sex workers. But I just want to say that thank you very much, Erin, for hosting this. I learned so much. Thank you so much, Erin. And God bless you, Erin. Thank you. And I learned from everybody on this panel. Thank you so much for giving everything you had, and I'm going to take everything you said, and I'm going to hold it in my heart and think about stuff. Alex, so thank you.
Thank you so much. I realize you do have to leave now, so thank you for
It's so late.
Thank you to Alex Trenoweth. Erin, we do have one more speaker, and we will now welcome Tom Jacobs. Can you please go ahead, Tom?
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Hi, Tom.
Great. Hi there.
Now I got to hang out to hear you, Tom.
Now what? You got to hang up?
No, I got to hang out to hear you now.
Oh, okay.
Well,
thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks for the invite to be here. I love thinking about and talking about and listening to others share stuff about this topic. And, you know, where I start with this is probably not very far from where all of you are, but I think of astrology as a language to describe energy, a symbolic language we can put words to, and we bring to it our conditioning and our assumptions. And so, of course, is astrology gender biased? Well, I think astrology is a tool, as somebody else has said. But our culture is coming out of this, you know, thousands of years long process of being gender biased for different reasons. And so how I do this is I understand that people sometimes try to get astrology to tell them specific things because people want to know if they're safe. People want to know if they're loved, if they're going to be successful. So sometimes people do approach astrology with this kind of desire to be able to see, you know, I mean, like, for example, does Saturn retrograde in a chart, in your chart, does it really mean this? Or in your chart, does it really mean that? Or Mars retrograde in the chart of a woman, like somebody else was talking about earlier. we want some kind of specificity because we crave self-understanding, of course. So where I come in to the whole stuff about gender and orientation and how we can see or not see things in the chart is that I focus as an evolutionary astrologer. I was trained in the C4S program, but then I went to get tutored by Hermes. That's who I work with: Hermes, Thoth, Saint Germain, Merlin, Jehudi. And so I've learned a lot of things from that being, which is a data bank. So I loved how Sarah said, all that is God is God data. And it's just a data bank we can draw on to understand from a bird's eye view, like what's going on the planet. So I approach this every human's experience as this chapter of a journey of soul. And soul is outside time and knows no time, thinking of what our Moshe said, you know, that I related to a lot of what you were sharing with that. And there's a chat thing and I can't see it, so hold on. I don't know if it's for me. Is it for me? Am I shouting? Oh, no. Okay, great. So somebody be like, Tom, you're speaking too loud. So your soul knows no gender, but all these variables, and this is what our Moshe was talking about too, these variables to explore what it means to be human. So in the chart, I can't tell if it's this person has this, you know, this set of pipes or that orientation, or may go through a transition or reassignment or revalidation of some kind or something, an affirming thing. We can't tell that. But what I can tell is a lot of information about the layers of conditioning as a fundamental layer. Like the way I look at Pluto, the South Node ruler, blah, blah, blah. But looking at social conditioning that has come through to the person at the soul's request, then looking at personality components, and then also kind of tying it all together to in the framework that, and this is kind of the philosophical underpinning of everything, of my view on this, of everything about a human's life and journey, is that a human is here to learn to individuate. And that requires self-validation. So all of these different variables get chosen, including the soul says I'm going to be born into a family that will not validate XYZ about me, so that I learn to validate myself. So how can I learn to validate myself? How can I see myself others can't or won't? How can I make it okay that I am exactly who I am? How can I do that? And so sexuality, all the things in conversation come into that as far as the in the human experience in the way that I think about it. I did write down a couple of examples which fit with Uranian things, and this has come up a couple times in the other speakers' talks. And I have a strong Uranian signature in my chart. I also have a strong Libra and Venusian signature in my chart. And so the examples I used are kind of stereotypical, but I encounter them in students and clients in making assumptions. So for example, Uranus in the 5th house. Does that mean, I have an alternate form of experience of sexuality or whatever? What if it's in Scorpio? And I noticed that Boaz talked about having that Uranus and Scorpio on the ascendant. And she said, well, something is different. Like something's different. Sorry if I'm referring to you incorrectly. I haven't met you before. But said something is different. But we don't know from the chart what that will be. So Uranus in the 5th house, let's say, natally. Well, let's say it's artistic expression and not about sexuality. What if it's about a genius at gambling, right? What if it's not about sexuality, right? So any planets in Aquarius, marching to the beat of their own drummer, right? Working through the lens of something, right? That's different, but it may not be all, even if it's Mars and Venus in Aquarius, it may not be that. So when I tutor people, when I do readings for people and do classes, this stuff comes up constantly, as I'm sure you all know and also experience, because again, parts of us are trying to understand why we are the way we are. We want certain details. Even in my own experience, I'll share 3 or 4 things with you briefly. One thing was I had Venus in Libra, and it's under 2 degrees above the ascendant in the 12th house. So it's quite a Venus. It's quite a Venus if you're just looking at the chart and seeing this this Venusian energy dawning on the eastern horizon. It's very dramatic. It is conjunct Pluto, which is several degrees into the 12th house. And of course, it's a chart ruler. And I have Mars and Uranus in Libra in the 1st house. So I carry Venus really strongly. And when I was a kid, this came out as people teasing me because I was soft, right? And when I was teased, I wouldn't fight back. The reason I wouldn't fight back is because I was afraid of doing disproportional harm, say it that way, disproportionate harm, because I knew that Mars energy was like, I was afraid of it. So then that led to more of the teasing because I wouldn't defend myself. So then there's this thing about the cultural stereotypes of boys, etc. I was always assumed by people who didn't know me that I'd be a football player. So broad shoulders, kind of physical strength. All that kind of stuff went on for years, and I was a musician and an artist, right? But Venusian, right? I was Venusian. But one thing that was a kind of a singular event about all these things, well, I will say this too. I did have an EA person, an EA astrologer, tell me, because of that Mars, Uranus, and Libra in the 1st, that I was bisexual. And I was like, I think the more specific you get about certain things without knowing a person, you risk being wrong. And the person was like, nope, that's what it means. And I was like, I guess I don't need to talk to you anymore, because it isn't true. I have a thing about Venus, but that doesn't mean it translates that way. And we have all the complexities. Like in Boaz's presentation, the one screen came up and there was a grid, not a grid, but like a listing, right? A grid of all the different potential symbols for different terms. There's so much complexity. And then in even an article that Linda linked to in the invitation, Linda says to the interviewer, there are as many ways of being gay as there are human beings in the world. I put that in my notes because I was like, I don't want to forget that, because this whole variety of human experience thing, it's vast, it's broad. You can't, I don't think you can, I think you should try to pin anyone into a box. And so as we're hearing from all the panelists, to listen to people's experience and to work with them where they are, I think, that's kind of where I come from with this. Okay, so then I was channeling a book from Hermes, Jehudi Thoth, it's called Goddess Past, Present, and Future. And it's about healing the patriarchal pain and reclaiming the goddess within each one of us, ending the patriarchy within our conditioning individually, and how to do it. And I got stopped halfway through for a few reasons. And the book really pushed my buttons about all these things about, different assumptions that were made about me. Like even women that I would be interested in dating, they'd say, no, you're gay. I'd say, I'm not gay. So I've had that side of it my whole life, right? Until I met my current partner, and the book was halfway done, and I had a block in my heart about healing my relationship with the goddess. And one of the first times she visited me, she was with me, and she just looked at my eyes and she just saw something, and she said, oh, well, that you're the goddess, which was the inverse of, Tom, you're probably gay. Seeing that Venus and Libra in a different lens. We even talked about it before this panel because she knew I was going to do this today. And it was a most beautiful moment, because listen to my voice. If you saw me physically, I'm kind of a big guy. Like, I don't have any effeminate qualities, except I do. But I don't, but I do. And then you see the round face and the Venusian thing coming through. So one of the things that I sometimes attract in people as clients is to, how can they, accept the profile they're experiencing, is kind of a weird way to say it, but how can they just be exactly who they are and get to know how they're wired in service of individuation, evolution of consciousness, growth of that soul through that person's experience. How can they take whatever it is about them that's true, look at it, take a deep breath, accept it, love it, live their lives? And that's been a huge part of my path with this. I don't talk about this all the time. I'll talk about a little bit of what I've shared here and there. But it's been a huge thing. And so also sometimes, clients will wonder about themselves, and I'll say, well, I think you have a sense, like, because they'll say, wait, what if I have Mars and Aquarius in the 5th house? And I say, what's true about you? What do you feel? And also, one of the other speakers, I'm sorry, I can't remember who, emphasized hearts, not parts. I think that was Boaz as well. And that to me, that speaks to my heart as well, as a really important, humanizing factor. How can any given human accept the self, validate the self? Because that's in my perspective what we're all doing here. So when I look at a chart, I'm opening to possibilities and allowing for possibilities, and I don't know what it's going to look like. Like Mars conjunct Uranus, or at planets in Aquarius, Uranus in the 5th house, or something like that. Uranus in the 7th house, or anything like that. We don't know. So anyway, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. But I do spend a lot of time with people dealing with their unconscious emotional memories that drive things and motivate them to make choices, but that they might not be in touch with, or maybe haven't learned how to articulate thus far. So, so you have the biological, chemical reality, you have the social conditioning, you have the person's thoughts and judgments based in social conditioning, family conditioning, and then you have how that person's heart functions, what directions that person's heart open toward. And you have emotional bonds of different kinds, and all of these things are not, working within tiny boxes. As I work with people's multi-life profiles in their emotional field, all of that in multiple layers from many, many lifetimes exist. So what I want to get at is, thank you, 1 minute. So what I want to get at is sometimes a person who is living a certain kind of expression or life or lifestyle will have a pull to another kind or another expression, and it could be temporary. I mean, it could be a revelation of a deep truth that needs to be owned and honored, and it could also be the revelation of a deep truth that may turn out to be temporary but needs to be owned and honored. Sometimes we might meet a person in this life we have this amazing kismet karmic connection with, and that person is the opposite of the gender we believe that we're going to connect with. Yeah, I did a woman for a while who said to me, I knew, because she had dated women previously, and she said, if I was ever going to marry a man, it would be you. And it freaked her out, right? Because here I am balanced, right? Half and half. So anyway, so sometimes we have that connection with somebody and we have to figure out, is this, something that's real and huge or real and moderate size, but it needs to be expressed and explored and found out. It may be the opposite of what we're expecting too. Anyway, so thank you. And now I will submit to dialogue.
Great, Erin.
It's sort of interesting. Thank you very much, Tom. Actually, it was very, very enlightening. I made good notes on it. And I wanted to mention a couple of things that you said, that we're really looking at something that is much more and bigger than either masculine and feminine. In other words, it takes both to make something alive, right? Otherwise it remains dormant, pent up, or locked inside the body, but it's not going to arrive. We have to have both masculine and feminine in order to be able to have a child. And therefore humanity is dependent upon both. And it would be horrible if for some reason we were deprived of one, or unable to have, say, offspring if we wanted them. If we don't, that's fine. It's not a problem. But it's made it very clear, because when you opened up, you talked about why we're really here. And the word individuate means to be against dividing. And that was Jung's favorite word. I mean, every single page of his books have individuation in some form on it. Yeah. And it's all about validating ourself through our uniqueness and individuating, becoming not divided, becoming whole.
Yes.
And so, it's you break it down easily. Divide. Yeah, go ahead. No,
So,
ask
sorry.
me.
Well, somebody else had talked about that feeling of the separateness while human. And
Right.
so for me, what I'm hearing is, what I'm hearing reflected is this, every human, what I left out that I would like to add in briefly is that one could look at, Hermes does look at the soul's journey of a human as learning to become the source of validation or the source of love for the self. So going deeply into how I perceive I'm different to find out that I am the divine returns me that I have the divine and that I'm not separate. So anyway, thank you,
I
reminded me
think,
I left that part out.
no, I'm glad that, I mean, that's why we have our little discussion afterwards. But I think if we didn't have Mars, like I wouldn't even get out of bed and get dressed.
Right.
I wouldn't, and it's only Mars that gets me up and running. And it's also Mars that pokes me and hurts me when I'm damaging myself and not, thinking, I think negatively. So Mars can both kill and cure, because if you go under the knife, as they say, it can pull out the cancer. I mean, so the function of Mars is not just about being a man or a woman, it's about a behavior or an experience.
Right.
Or an object or a thing, just like any of the planets in the zodiac. And so when we're talking with clients and working with astrology and really looking at horoscopes, regardless of the level of astrology that you're at, you have to keep in mind that every single aspect of astrology is about becoming increasingly more of yourself.
Yes, thank you.
Not being defined by having Mars, like I have Mars, Saturn, Pluto, and Leo squared by the sun, I mentioned. But I also have the Moon and Neptune in Libra, sextile Jupiter, Venus, and Sagittarius. It's party time, yeah?
Right.
And the rest of the time, it's like death and dirge and, oh my God, I can't write. Stab. So, I mean, we can damage ourselves if we don't understand our astrology enough. We can hurt ourselves. We can heal ourselves by looking at our own horoscopes now. We should do that in a day or so and reflect on what we've done today and what everyone has shared and how we can integrate that information and that separate but at the same time integrated knowledge, because everything that we've talked about has had to do with the horoscope, planets, planet. That's all we've talked about. And that's what we should be thinking about over the next few days is how can we integrate? How do we have something come up? Because I'm just going to mention this really quickly, but something came up where I have to tell you this. I was shocked when I heard the phrase, because I thought somebody's been listening to me. But at a conference in the rooftop pool, I was swimming with a friend of mine, a male, a long time friend, very, very well known, very good astrologer, and swimming in the pool. And he said, Erin, can I talk to you about something? I said, of course, and nothing you can. And he said, basically, he said, I can't get it up anymore. And I said, well, here's the thing. This is what you need to take in. And this is where you said, it's about the heart, not the part. And his whole everything changed. He suddenly became virile, not there and then, but everything returned. He was a friend in the pool. So anyway, he his heart and his part got it together, and he became fine. And so it just took another woman swimming around in a pool of water, where the womb is water, right? So we give birth to things in water. And when that came up and he shared that, I just felt so honored, and I just had to laugh. I mean, I thought, you poor thing. Women very rarely have that problem, by the way. But men do, because there is an issue about Mars and the part and making sure that you're getting it up. And so I think that we've had one of the most stimulating, informative panels, and it's been a joy to have all of you on. I'm really appreciative, and I thank you so much for being astrologers and sticking with it as hard as it is to do.
Erin, how would you feel about a final summing up by each speaker for 2 minutes each. How would you feel about that?
I would feel really great about it and keep it to 2 minutes, because otherwise you're in trouble.
Yeah.
We'll get our bars up.
Okay, let's begin with Boaz. Go ahead, Boaz.
So I feel honored being here tonight, and I've just enjoyed so much hearing all of us, you know, bring up the same ideas, thinking along the same lines and adding to one another. And I wish this conversation would continue.
Okay, so let's continue now with Ari Moshe.
All right. Yeah, this was really sweet. Mars has been transiting my Mercury Neptune during this afternoon, so I've been doing a lot during this process. I have nothing specific to say, but much love to all of you, and thank you for creating this space.
Thank you, Ari. And Sarah?
Well, I don't have a lot to say other than just the importance. I want to underscore the importance of individuating and creative self-actualization, and the fact that we have not discovered all the ways in which how to express ourselves. That's why we're here, you know? And so, although biology is a thing here in the physical realm, how we express ourselves is dictated by ourselves. That's the person who's the final arbiter of who it is we are, and how we connect to spirit. That comes from us being true to ourselves, and that's gonna iterate in ways that we don't even have labels for yet, you know? So it's an interesting time that we're in, and I just want to say thanks for inviting me on to talk about this topic, and to you know, just thanks for letting me share what I have, and thanks everyone for sharing as well, because yeah, it's just been a great discussion. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And finally, Tom?
Say thank you. It was a pleasure to listen to everybody and to have a chance to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And Erin, can we have a final summing up statement from you?
What I've liked most, because this is definitely off the top of my head, as it were, and is that everybody had something to contribute that was completely unusual and different, and and some of the stuff I didn't know, a lot of it. And so when I thought, because I make notes of what people have talked about so that I can review, and what I'm seeing is that today astrology has a lot more hope for becoming a really significant counseling tool and a working tool. I am by nature, evolutionary astrologer by nature. I think that by design, I have been as well in my work, because I think in terms of evolution, everybody who has talked has at some point mentioned the whole potential for our evolution and how we can grow by understanding more about our anima and animus, that the anima is the feminine side of the person, and that, because Jung was a man of his times, like Freud, so there's an anima in both men and women, and there's an animus in both men and women, and we alternate between them, and they sometimes marry, and when they're married, we have the marriage, the holy marriage, the marriage sagrado. And I think that that's what we're aiming for, is this marriage sagrado, that we become part and parcel of our wholeness. And I think that's what this panel has actually really done a lot for. So anyone who's listening will really gain from understanding more about themselves and other people. Thank you so much for being here.
And thank you so much, Erin Sullivan. I'd like to thank all of our speakers today for this amazing panel discussion. And so thank you from all of us and from our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom. Would you now please all thank Erin Sullivan and the panelists?
Yes.
Thank you, guys. That was awesome.
I loved it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye for now. We'll see you at the next panel discussion.
Thank you, Linda, for all your work. You're great.
My pleasure. Thank you, Erin. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.